I did my thesis at Carnegie Mellon University. And if you want to know more about me, you can check my website. It's just my name, but the last two letters reversed. Um, all right. So yeah, getting into the application process, it's fairly straightforward and fairly disappointing actually. First is, of course, you need to identify people who you would like to work with. This is, of course, based on your own interests and your previous work experience. The second point is actually, both the points are actually very important, but the second point is actually something that plays a big factor in basically if you'll be able to get the thesis or not, because people don't really want to waste time, and even if you have 2 months of relevant work experience in something, they would pick you rather than someone else, even if they have like a crazy high CGPA or something. So previous work experience or project experience is really important. But even though this is there, if there are certain aspects to your profile which are really standing out. For example, if your CGPA is some 9.5, 9.6 or something, then point that out, because uh, these are often people who themselves didn't have 9.6 CGPA, so they're always like, oh, I get to work with someone who's probably better done their undergraduate studies than I had. So point out these important things. Um, so yeah, the next thing is draft an email to send. This is highly subjective. This is something that I'd send uh, for a research internship. You might know of Mila. If you don't know about Mila, then you should look it up, because it's one of the best places to do research, especially academic research in artificial intelligence. So it's called MILA, Montreal Institute of Learning Algorithms, and I had applied there for a humanitarian AI project. And so this was like the rough structure. Basically, um, this does not matter much. You introduce yourself and basically just say what you want. So over here, it's just, I'm just going over the fact that, yeah, I want to do an internship. You avoid mentioning stuff like, there's formalities, there's all that gets taken care of later on. And after that, it's just a bit of highlights of what I've done so far. So I had a bunch of things, which was a research internship in my second year, after my second year summers, GSOC. So there was a startup. I'm not sure if you know about the startup. There's a Vixen startup called as Pixel, where I'd done a little bit of humanitarian AI. So this was like pretty much like the main factor, in fact, because I had attached an initial report, and he had uh, commented stuff, and like he looked up the report and basically commented stuff in it. So relevant work experience always trumps anything else. Um, and basically, I proposed some project ideas and just said that I would be okay with uh, working with something else as well that is currently going on. So of course, so this landed me a reply, but I couldn't pursue this for some other reasons, which was um, basically if you know about the EEE department, we need to get some uh, approvals, which I didn't get. Um, so yeah, this is just a summary of just whatever the stuff that I pointed out. But the point is that you might not get a response. Oh, so one second. Is there any background sound that you're getting?
Yes.
Okay. One second. Let me just. Okay, cool. Yeah, it should not be there now. Yeah, so the point is that the reasons for not getting a research internship can be too many. So the point is that so one thing that's really important is to send reminders. Most researchers will ignore your first email because so many people might be sending them emails. So send a reminder 1 or 2 weeks in, just so that, just to let them know that you're serious about this. If you're okay in working in an unpaid position, then mention that as well, because uh, yeah, who doesn't want someone working in an unpaid position? At the same time, it's your decision to consider the fact that it's an unpaid position. So um, unless it's someone too good, avoid it. Um, if you're not getting any responses with even 25, 30 emails, then there's something wrong with your content. And in such a situation, it's always best to ask some senior about what's going wrong. Okay. Um, so right, just I'm highlighting my previous work experience, but even before that, uh, it's it's absolutely normal to be sending more than 50, 75 emails for your thesis. Absolutely normal to be going in 3 or 4 months just emailing people, because assuming you send like 5, 6 emails each weekend or each week, then there's 20 emails each month, and you end up with 80 emails across the whole semester. And this is completely normal. I think this is something that you'll hear from a lot of people today as well, uh, because and it's always so you need to have backups as well in this. So the example that I just pointed out, the fact that my first acceptance was actually rejected due to not being allowed to do that internship because it was not relevant to my degree. These things can happen as well. So unless you have at least 3 or 4 offers in your hand, do not stop emailing, because you never know what why one of the internships might not work out. So yeah, so I'm going to point out my experience from the previous work experience that I had from my second year internship, um, because that's really only all of what you need, not really, the stuff that I did later on. But basically, I'd done that intern at a machine learning startup, and by the end of by the time when I was even applying for my thesis, this did not exist. But the work I did there was pretty catchy. So I mentioned that. So I was part of SAIDL. If you don't know about SAIDL, just check out this website. We're basically a society in Bitscoa. Uh, we do a lot of AI and deep learning related research. There's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of open source projects and stuff. So yeah, I was the coordinator of that, of SAIDL at that time. And pretty much like the main important point was for me was a bit of a star-studded GitHub. And this actually came from one of my projects from SAIDL. So if you have if you have a star-studded GitHub, no one is going to deny you anything. So if you can, and it's not really that big of a deal to be able to do that. It's just you need to know how to work on something relevant and how to sell that relevant work that you've done. So for my thesis, I had my previous research internship. I had a GSOC from last year as well, and a paper preprint. So thesis was not particularly that difficult to find for me. But even then, I had emailed around 25 people, and I did not. I think like I'd only gotten 5 to 10 responses. So yeah, this is like the situation anyway. So coming to my thesis, I did my thesis at Safe AI Lab uh, at CMU, which is basically a lab that focuses on interpretability, safety, deployment of AI in the real world. It's affiliated with the Robotics Institute and Machine Learning Department. So my work was on domain adaptation for autonomous vehicles. I'll expand on this in a little bit, and on optimal sensor placement in autonomous vehicles. I'll expand on that also in a bit. And so the work that I've done is already under review at a core A-star conference, and we're thinking of writing a few more papers as well. So so it's really important for you to get preprints of papers in your thesis. So keep that as your end goal, because ML without having a paper in ML, getting a master's is fairly impossible unless you're the batch topper or something. So right. So yeah, coming to my thesis, basically the motivation is that if you are following any of the autonomous vehicles research, then you might know how important LiDAR-based 3D object detection is. So what LiDAR is basically it's a sensor on top of this vehicle, and it basically shoots points or lasers basically, and those lasers reflect back from objects to the vehicle, and basically what you get at the end is basically like this cloud of points at which are at a particular distance, and these points are basically on objects. So for example, this is the road, this is some tree over here, these are some bushes, sorry, over here is some object, over here there's something else, and there's some truck over here, right? You can literally see the truck structure. So it's really important basically, right? But the problem is that autonomous vehicles have these LiDARs and they're placed completely randomly. There's no decision making as to why you're placing LiDARs over here, why you're placing LiDARs over here, why you're placing LiDARs over here. So there is no principled or a, like a way, like let's say a data driven way to be able to say that, something like this might work better than this. So this is pretty much what I've done. Basically, kind of develop a data-centered approach to how you can place sensors. And a pretty important topic over here is something called as domain adaptation. And what this means is that the tasks that you perform in the real world will never be from a static distribution. So let's say you train your model on this particular data set, right? And now you deploy it on a vehicle, and this data set was actually you know it was actually trained in San Francisco, and you end up applying this to like a Mumbai or Delhi or some other place. And it's pretty much visible. The variation is crazy over here. So it's not straightforward to be able to adapt to different domains, and especially when the sensor placements are not decided, it's impossible to be able to transfer whatever you've learned from, let's say, one data set to another data set. So the domain adaptation is a very important topic right now. And basically, the work that I did was on that lines. Another idea is, let's say, you train your model on climates. Let's say it's just a sunny weather, and you end up testing it on snowy or rainy weather. So if you have a sunny climate, then your point cloud would just be the road. The points on the road would just be flat. But if it's snowy, it won't be flat. It's just completely rugged, right? Even for rainy, your images that you see are completely occluded. So domain adaptation is one of the really important topics. So it was pretty much the first work to be able to. So yeah, the rough idea is basically the training distribution is not the same as the testing distribution. And this was pretty much the first work um, to to basically come up with a framework to be able to decide where to place sensors, and also show the fact that it's actually working on real world metrics. For example, if you know anything about object detection, then there's something called as mean average precision, which is a standard metric that's used. And on evaluation on that, basically the method that we proposed was performing much better. So, right, I think like the final part is basically just the advice part. Um, so just to repeat it, I will actually suggest you to go through yesterday's talk, because I think what they've covered, I don't think it's possible to cover it in a better sense of the whole situation. But these are some things uh, that I was able to come up in the few very limited time that I spent on these slides, which is probably clearly visible right now. So first thing is develop yourself, your own brand. Um, and you can get inspired by this looking at a lot of seniors, I think, uh, me included, I guess. You can check out my website how to do these things, because if you're focusing only on a particular, if you're working with only a particular person, then research has a crazy number of politics, crazy amount of politics involved. So lots of other things as well. So always develop yourself, your own brand. Um, no one cares really. Um, because PIs might have five other undergraduate students similar to you. So yeah. So another thing is know how to sell yourself. There's lots of way to do this. Think of LinkedIn, Twitter, of these as tools rather than some cringy place or something. So you need to know how to sell yourself. You need to know what to sell. You need to know um, where to sell. For example, let's say you come up with an open source project. You need to know where to publicize it. You cannot just go around sending people emails, right? So a good place to where to sell open source projects is, for example, Reddit. On subreddits, you'll find a lot of subreddits focusing on machine learning. If your, let's say, project or your package is relevant to machine learning, and other things as well. So one thing that people often don't do, which I suggest them to do, uh, first of all, is build your own portfolio website. If you have a portfolio, if you have your own portfolio website, then people know that you're interested or you're developing yourself and you know how to sell things. There's some basic checkboxes that people always look for, and this is one of them. Um, so in research, especially research at BitScoa, where people don't do research normally, there are a lot of uncertain situations. It's pretty important that you consult your seniors or someone experienced over there. Uh, professors are moody. Professors don't want to do things, um, and in often in the right sense. So yeah, definitely talk to seniors about what you can do about it. And if the senior actually knows the professor, then you might be able to help or something. Um, in general, in any computer science related research, it is pretty important to develop um, the strongest understanding of the fundamentals rather than work on some hi-fi problem. Um, so unless you have your fundamentals sorted out, no one you getting any position is pretty much impossible, especially industrial positions. Things like basic data structures, basic knowledge of machine learning, basic knowledge of probability and statistics, basic knowledge of linear algebra, basic knowledge of optimization. These are the things. There's a certain there are certain topics that you need to know, and you need to have the strongest grip on those topics. If you do, then selling your hi-fi projects will always help. Um, and the point is that really navigating computer science research is pretty much built into the kind of understanding that you have of your fundamentals. It would be really easy if your fundamentals are strong. One thing is develop a regular habit of coding. So this is something that I have personally faced. I often end up not coding for weeks, and I find that it actually affects how much code you're able to churn in some sense. So this can be anything, like random Saturday projects, random things that you're developing. Um, um I'm doing lead code, etc. I think like one of the pretty much the most important point, especially I think for a lot of us, was form a group of like-minded people who have similar interests. When you do that, then you're basically doing osmosis. If you know about osmosis, it's basically learning things from others, and you're able to learn things faster. You're able to discuss about any issues that you might be having, etc. So yeah, I think that's about it from my side. Uh, Again, so yeah, oh, yeah. Finally, if you're interested in ML, join SAIDL. Um, it is my strongest recommendation that you do that. Uh, but yeah, yeah, that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Sharad Bhaiya. And next in line, we have Adithya Niranjan.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're
Okay.
audible.
Yeah. Let me know when my screen's up. Is it up?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Yeah. So just going to be I'm going to be talking more about my industrial research experience, because I think a lot of people have covered how to write mails and how to apply a lot better than I will be doing in this context, because I think there's several people who touched on this topic, on how to mail, how to build up a proper mail template, you know. So I think I'll just touch a bit on corporate research and then go into what I did. Firstly, I guess, I mean, just before that, just sharing my experience applying for thesis and what I wish I did. I mean, I think this would have been mentioned, but I think the first thing was, personally, I started sometime around end February or March in earnest. So I did want to start applying, say, around January in that semester, but I just kept procrastinating. And at beyond a point, it basically becomes where you need to start applying or you'll not get a thesis, and that panic is often leading to bad decisions, like you don't spend enough time on mails, or you end up, I mean, at the end, mailing haphazardly or applying more. So I think the first thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is to start early for thesis. I mean, I think pretty much every senior has this feedback, except like people who were very, very conscientious and careful about it. The second thing was to apply broadly. So one sort of mistake I did in the initial phases was that I picked a topic where I'd worked previously in meta learning, and I mailed, say, the big shots in the field, and I just kept mailing people who had worked in a common topic. So to some extent, I'd mentally convinced myself that I wouldn't be content if I didn't work in this field. And I feel this perspective is there to some extent, where you pick a topic you feel you're good at and then you stick to it. But it can backfire significantly, because most of the time profs are like not available mostly for thesis. So most people who end up getting a thesis send around 50 to 70 mails, and it's more likely than not the one prof you want or the one topic you want might not be gettable, and this can lead to fair amount of trouble. Related is apply consistently. Try to send, say, at least 2 to 3 mails a week, if at all you're up, like starting in, say, January or before, or later on, if at all you're starting late, you need to actually pick up the pace a lot. Because what I did was, when I used to draft my mails, I used to just sit on them, where I would write a good mail and then I would say, okay, maybe I should refine these few lines better. Maybe I should write more about what their work is doing and so on. And I found that the responses were not really correlated with what I wrote, to some extent. I mean, I did show interest, and I did mostly did show strong indications that I'd read their papers and details on those and ideas. But the responses I got sometimes were in the lower effort meal. So don't sit on a mail for too long. Send them as soon as possible, and try not to like have multiple days where you do not mail a prof. So my experience, what did work for me was networking. So figured out where seniors were already there, and then I contacted people in those labs. So a couple of them were CVC Barcelona, and this was actually sort of coincidental. I found a person who was working at Intel Labs on BitScenes for each other. So this was where I had a sort of big break, and like after that, I just ended up contacting the person, getting a referral, and like I found a good fit in terms of research, where I started working on neural architecture search, which is tied to meta learning. So in the end, I did get what I wanted, but this was more of a lucky thing. So in the sense that I did get lucky with what I picked. So moving on, I think I'll just start a bit about corporate research. So I mean, I think there are a lot of excellent speakers on the general academic research side, and I think Sharad did a great job at that as well. I think one of my experience, something specific to it, is that I ended up doing a research thesis at Intel Labs. So I think, what did I find in terms of the benefits? Like, I felt some things that I felt not all my peers had. So in general, industrial research is it's focused on specific results. So at the start of the project, you'll be assigned something that is practical and it can be tackled. Like a lot of, a lot of industrial research, except like, let's say, pure research, which happens at a few places, will be mostly something that is realizable, and you tend to get results in terms of within a year and so on. And I think this is one, this is not specific to all theses, but I think this is one advantage. Projects do have time frames. So in general, you'll be working with your colleagues, and you have setups where you'll have regular work meets, and in general, you're pushed to get results in, say, 3 or 6 months. And there's generally a discussion of a clear timeline. Then there are more sources of mentorship. So in general, you'll get to work with, say, multiple team scientists, and you're generally, in general, if you convince them that you're good, you'll be treated on level footing. So you're allowed to do what you want within the context of your topic. And most of the time, you can always ask them for guidance and help, but it's never like you're not part of the team. Publication and patents. I think publications are pretty much there for most thesis work. So when people apply, they apply for thesis, they have publications in mind. Side benefit of industry experience is patents, where you can also sort of showcase like whatever research papers you write can also just be productized into patents. And I think this counts a lot in the long run. And then industry collaborations with academia. So as part of my work at Intel Labs, I got to work with teams at MIT and UCSD, where you end up you can actually just reach out to researchers there and pick a problem where there's common interest between, say, your group, let's say here at Intel, and what is there at the groups in the universities. And in general, this leads to a lot of better contacts and more collaboration. I think this is one of the big benefits of what I found at Intel Labs. So going to corporate research groups in India, this is not exhaustive, but these are some of the places where seniors from BITS have been in the past. So there's Microsoft Research. I think Saundarya must have gone through a bit of it yesterday, and I think Arshia will be soon. There's Intel Labs. So Intel Labs, I think I've seen a lot of electronics and EEE people apply previously to Intel Labs. I think I was one of the first people to find that there was like ML research here, and I think they are definitely going to be expanding in India. There's TCS Research. TCS Research has excellent collaborations with our university. So in case any of you are interested, I do suggest approaching Prof. Ashwin or Titraj and discussing this even long term, like even while you're in college before your thesis. Google Research. So Google Research generally does not have a structured thesis program. I had applied, but I did not have one back then. But I think they're stepping towards it. So I'd really suggest you try in case, you can. They generally end up taking people who got the summer intern there as research intern. So this is one thing to consider if you're still in the early stages, although getting Google interns is a fair challenge in itself. There's Vasvani, where this is more of a mix between, say, a for-profit research group versus a sort of not-for-profit one, but I think there's great research going on there as well. So these are some of the places where you can consider applying, like, for a corporate research experience. So how do you end up applying to them? So in general, these are fairly niche in India. I think especially the bulk of like undergrads tend to switch to more, let's say, software dev or other related work. So most students don't end up applying to research jobs. So it is a bit tricky. they expect prior research experience. So in general, as long as you can show that you've worked in a fair bit of research, you need to know your basics really well. You have multiple interviews at these places, which are fairly rigorous. I ended up having 5 before I could intern at Enter. And then your any publications or like prior research experience is a big plus. In terms of getting Microsoft research, TCS research, Vasvani, I'd suggest mailing them as soon as possible. So these places generally are tricky to get responses from. So challenge that I faced personally while applying to Microsoft research is that I didn't get too many responses early on. And by the time I did get responses, the thesis dates were over. So I mean, this is one thing to keep in mind, where you need to keep messaging and sending reminders and keep track of these. For Intel Labs, I think the main way to get this is through referrals. So in general, if you have contacts from academy, I mean, if you know people from your college or any related place, or let's say, I mean, I think if at all you're able to get a professor to refer you, that would help as well, considering that BITS does have some industry collaborations. So this comes to the next 2 points. The next thing you can do is say directly contact managers of research groups. So this you need to do your own research about, where you basically find research managers on LinkedIn and you find people who are currently working. This might be a bit of a longer shot. And this ties back to papers and patents from the groups and finding contacts. So these two are slightly longer shots overall. So I think this was my overview of corporate research. So I ended up actually taking up the referral and started working. So I did not really have the whole mailing process per se for this particular thing. So going into what I ended up doing. So firstly, I ended up working on automating machine learning. So why is a good question. So in general, for most of you who worked previously with ML pipelines, I'm pretty sure you'd have seen cases where you had a lot of design choices, where you'd have, let's say, if you're applying a DL model, you need to first build the architecture, choose a lot of hyperparameters, and tune them. So a lot of this is basically a fair bit of tedium sometimes. I found that hyperparameter settings that work easily for some models don't at all work for others, and there's a fair bit of tuning involved. And this is particularly interesting from a sort of industry perspective, because the number of industry applications of DL is only increasing exponentially. So standard pipelines have significant engineering cost, where people end up having to spend days and months just tuning models. So can we look into automating these choices? In this context, this is just a cartoon that represents what parts of AutoML can automate. So the feature selection, the model selection, overall the optimization of the model. So you can find models that learn quicker or convert faster. And then the evaluation, where basically you can build a loop where instead of having manually evaluating models on whatever metric you have, say accuracy or prediction error or anything, you can just look at an AutoML technique that does all of this, does it in a loop, and then returns the best model. So in particular, I worked on neural architecture search. So here, this neural architecture search focuses mostly on optimizing the DL model itself. So it works in the context of model selection, and it does have some parallels with optimization. So you end up actually, say, picking a neural network and then looking into how it can be modified, or how you can construct new neural networks based on a given inspiration, say something like residual networks, and then you use controllers to create like the new architecture. So if you do this in a loop, you end up getting better performance and overall more efficiency. So just to describe this, you'd be going from something where you have a search space, which is, you can consider any neural network. So in this case, I mean, this can look like something where you just have a 3-layer MLP, where you're just having the second layer with 3 nodes. and one with 2 nodes. I mean, this is an extremely simplified view of it. And then you would be making the choices, picking the architectures, training and evaluating them, and sort of looping between these. Here, you'd rather let a controller do this for you, and you'd automate the process at some learning cost. And at the end of this, you can use this controller to give you new architectures. In terms of improvement, so you can see like standard neural networks like ResNets and dense nets, which are mostly hand designed. And these tend to form a front where you can see that there is a trade between how much accuracy you can get and the computational cost, which would basically sort of map to how long your architecture would take or how much energy it would have in order to produce inference when you're using it. And AutoML finds architectures that are significantly more efficient. So these are the ones with the stars. So you can generally expect, say, 3 to 4% accuracy gains, which is huge, and say up to like 5x latency and other parameters. So you generally focus on designing more efficient and more accurate networks. So this is the main focus of the work I've been working, where you've been actually looking at how can we co-design different networks along with hardware parameters as well. So in the context of my work, I ended up discovering a new approach to co-design, and we've submitted it currently. It's on that review at the A-Star conference. So this was more of a context of what I ended up doing. So you can see, I mean, practically what kind of modifications you get. I mean, this is not our work. This is more of an example where EfficientNet is one paper by Google where they'll automatically discover what choices you should be making in terms of different layers, where you'd actually be changing the parameterization of end layers in the network and the initial layers. And this leads to significant gain. So you can see like these curves represent sort of the trade-off once again between accuracy and say the hardware compute cost, where we're just using the number of parameters as a proxy, and you can see significant differences. Yep. So this was mostly my experience, and now once again I've just linked in a few resources that I found useful, where there's Bitsians for each other, which is the group I was mentioning. There's Bits R&D, which I think is probably the biggest source of resources overall. It has its own thesis page where you find a lot of details. Here, there are a couple of pages I've linked for mailing advice, and I'm pretty sure you'd have got a lot of information from the other speakers and the ones to come as well. All right. Yep. Thank you. I'll share the slides after the meet.
Thank you, Aditya Bhaiya. And next we have Arshia Arya Didi.
Yeah, once. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, your voice is
Yeah,
clear.
yeah, cool. So, hi everyone. I think this initiative is really good, and a lot of my friends have actually covered really unique points. And the thing about this thing is, thesis application is that everyone has a unique experience, has a unique set of projects and interests, because research is a very, very broad field. So it's nice to hear everyone's perspectives. So make sure you check out the resources put up by all of them in order to pick up bits and pieces from everyone and figure out what works for you. Here, in the interest of time, I can't possibly complete end to end all aspects of applying for thesis and all aspects about my thesis and everything. But I would try to cover some points that were especially useful for me. and some things that I get constantly asked by juniors, so that you can make the most of the time I have here. So these are some points that I have kind of prepared. So one thing that students usually struggle with is that what if you don't have the experience for whatever you're applying to? So this is a very common problem, and uh, regardless of what you might feel that, oh, I don't have a project in this, or oh, I don't have an internship with this. You must remember that ultimately you're still a student in undergraduate, and the professor or the researcher in any place also knows that it's not possible to have like a 2 year, 3 year work experience kind of work on your resume before you apply. So do not underestimate the places that you apply to because of this. And the most important thing is that if you're interested in something, then start learning about it, read one paper, try to, okay, if you read a paper you couldn't understand, try to understand its basics on YouTube. There are lots of talks from tutorials from conferences that have happened. And I wouldn't just say online courses from Udemy, edX, those things, because those are general. When you're applying for a research internship, think about the fact that you're going specific, right? So try to, when you're applying in a certain domain, try to learn its basics so that you can reflect that in your email. You can, when you give an interview, you can reflect that knowledge in your interview. So that is something that helped me, and that also kept the curiosity going, right? So don't be afraid that you don't have experience. You just need to sort of build up on your curiosity enough with action, so that you're valuable to the person you're applying to. So that was one point. Then many people get confused that, okay, fine, but there's so much stuff to learn. Where do I start? So just start somewhere. So, for example, for me, I was my majors are in economics and computer science, and from economics, I got introduced to causal inference, and I noticed that it has applications in computer science as well. So that's where I started reading about it. Then I read some survey papers, which basically talk about all the methods of any given topic. And then, in fact, I mailed the people who were the authors of that paper, and I also looked at the references of that paper, and saw their authors, put them on my list. So all this may sound, all these are actually very underrated things that people don't capitalize on. So that is, I think, a strategy you can consider. Also use, like Sharad also mentioned, use Twitter and LinkedIn very powerfully, especially if you're applying for research internships. Twitter is very powerful because the academic community is very active on Twitter. And once you follow some people in any area that you're interested in, their feeds will lead you to other people. So it just kind of leads to a ripple effect, and then you have a curated list of people you can apply to, labs you can apply to, which are for your interest, and not some like a general list that everyone would be applying to, right? So those are some things that work for me. And a word of caution here, that this just somehow worked for me. It may not work for you. For you, maybe going in a more general fashion works out. But I'm just sharing my experience here. So now coming to something more general, which is people ask, when should we send reminders and follow-ups? So the usual protocol is uh, a week or 10 days. And if you're using Streak or some kind of mail tracker to keep a track of whether the professor has seen the email or not, you can accordingly send the reminder. And obviously, take care of things like sending according to their time zone. So if you send an email when it is 2 a.m. at night for them, it's more likely to get missed. So you can be strategic about those things. And yeah, I'm again going to point out a very important but an underrated point here, that please be very respectful when you're reminding professors or researchers about your email. Because and even when you're taking help from seniors, because it may seem like, okay, this is the most important thing for you right now, and you are sending like constant reminders and in a very hurried tone. But that gives off a very unprofessional vibe, and you don't want to start a collaboration like that. So if you are taking help from someone or approaching the professor again, please do not encroach the basic professional tenets. You'd be surprised why am I talking about this, but I have seen many instances of this happening, and that's why I, as a piece of advice from a senior to a junior, I would definitely like to point that out. Now, the next question that I get that is obviously must be on an applicant's mind is how to apply to Microsoft Research in particular. So, mailing researchers is basically the way to get in, and that's how me as well as everyone I know who has done their thesis here has gotten through it. So, but sometimes the researchers also put out a call for interns when they have a requirement. This is usually via Facebook groups like Bitsians for each other, and sometimes it also circulates on WhatsApp groups. So if you have a Bitsian senior working at a group in MSR where you want to work, so just look out for that, because those calls come out and you need to submit your resume and other details. But these are the only two ways. Um, and like also referrals individually, I don't think, at least in my experience, don't work. That if you know someone who works at MSR and you ask them to refer you, that's difficult. Usually mailing or these call for internships work out. Yeah, so the next thing that that people are curious about is that how many interviews happen and what is asked in those interviews, right? So I must tell you that the number of rounds of the interviews, as well as the um, nature of the interviews, is highly subjective, and you may be asked from anything from basic coding skills to reading research papers and critiquing them and proposing research ideas over papers. So this is very, very subjective, and you can't generalize how what would be the rounds of interviews that will happen. So and the nature of the interviews vary drastically with the researcher, the group, and what they require from the intern. So even if you might know someone who is interning at that group, if the project that you would be assigned has different requirements, the nature of your interview might be different. So while it is good to be prepared, there's no like sort of textbook way of preparing for this. So you just have to generally keep brushing up skills which are good for research, as well as basic coding and DSA and all of that, right? Yeah, the next question that's very important and is necessary to keep in mind is, when should you start mailing and Microsoft Research India? So that is, you should start mailing around 6 months before your internship has to start. So suppose your internship has to start in August, if you are doing a thesis in the odd semester, then start in February. Starting any earlier would not serve you any good, because the researchers themselves don't know about uh, whether they'll require interns, what projects will they require interns for. So if you just like send emails, that will just go unread or unconsidered for. And but if you just be a little patient and start a little later, then the researchers would be looking for interns, and they're more likely to consider your candidature. So that is another thing that I would like to say. And yeah, Microsoft Research internships are get it ready at the moment. So in your thesis, can that this was MSR. Some of the were and
Hello, Didi, I think your
these
voice is breaking. Hello.
Dhruv, so before, if Arshia has some internet issues, should I just go ahead, or else it'll be a waste of time for some people?
No, you can go on, please. I think like maybe she has some internet problems and she'll probably join, so we can continue after you're finished.
Okay, okay, I'll go next then.
Yeah,
Just let me set up my screen.
yeah.
Let's wait for 1 minute, right?
I guess, yeah, we can
Fine,
wait
let's wait.
for a minute or two. We'll start at 7:57, I guess.
Okay.
Hmm.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry. My
you're
internet.
audible.
Yeah, my internet connection went off. So I was just. I'll just conclude in about 2 minutes. So that was about applying, and yeah. So this was my sort of general about my thesis. So I mean, my thesis was at Microsoft Research India under the Technology and Emerging Markets Group under Dr. Amit Sharma in core machine learning. And my experience was very positive, and I had a very positive mentorship experience. The topic of my thesis was modeling unobserved confounding for causal inference methods. And I think, in the interest of time, I won't go too much into detail about this. You can either visit my website to know more details, or we can discuss this offline sometime. So if you have any questions, like I'll share this document in some form with the group, and if you have any questions, you can ask me later. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Arshia Didi. Next in line, we have Ashwin Vasvani Bhaiya.
Just a second. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Ashwin Vasvani. I won't be taking much of your time. I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So a lot of common points are already covered. I'll just skim through the common points and like put some detail into the ones that I feel have not been covered so far. So I did my thesis at the QTIM lab, which is set up by Harvard Medical School, MGH, and MIT. And I'll briefly like just go through the application procedure, the timeline, and everything. So the first point is you need to decide, or you need to understand if you'll be going for grad school immediately or right after your undergraduate. If that is the case, then I'd say go for a SEM1 thesis. That is because you would have some research experience on your profile and you would have a letter of recommendation from your thesis supervisor, which would be helpful in your master's or your PhD application. So ideally, you'd require around 3 LORs for your graduate school applications. Yeah, so that's about deciding which SEM to choose. I'd say start your process early. So I had started my process in November or December, and by process I mean finding out your interests, what you want to work on, what kind of areas or domains interest you, who are the professors who are doing work in that domain. You can start off with reading some blogs or papers and explore what you might want to do. Once you have that, you can just compile a set of professors that you would want to mail. Again, you don't have to mail it immediately in November or December. You can start mailing sometime in late December or Jan. But having a list and knowing what you want to do is extremely important. Now, how do you find professors? So there's two ways to go about it. One is, as Arshia said, you can just once you've read a few papers and you've liked what they've done in their research, you can just check their author list and see which labs that these authors belong to, or you can just check the papers that these papers have cited, and you can just check the author list for those papers. That'll give you an idea as to what labs and what people are sort of working in that area that you're interested in. The second thing is again CS rankings, which gives you a list of professors based on a particular domain area. So if you have logic, you can just use logic and you'll get a list of professors working from different universities in logic. If you uh, have something like NLP, you can just enter NLP and you'll get a list of professors working in NLP. So that's again very helpful. What I'd say is don't mail everyone. When you go through CS rankings, you get a big list of professors. Go through their profiles, go through their personal websites, see what they're working on, and if it's something that's sort of matching with your interest, only then mail. There's no point sending 300 mails. People do send a lot of mails. I'd say sending around 100 mails is fine, but I wouldn't recommend going beyond that. So that's about finding professors. Coming to application tips. So the most important point is don't get demotivated. Like you will not get replies from every mail. So as I said, if you send around 100 mails, you probably wouldn't get replies from even 50% of them. That's how difficult the procedure is, and it's really demotivating. Like all of us have been through that. The second point is schedule your mails for the morning time of the time zone in which the lab is located. For example, if a lab is located in the US, I typically schedule it sometime in the evening according to Indian Standard Time so that it's morning for them. Also, try to schedule your mails in the beginning of the week because they might get ignored during the weekend. So a lot of professors like to keep their work and personal life separate. So they might ignore your work mails during the weekend. Again, that's subjective. It depends on person to person. And I know some people who have also got replies on the weekend, but that's something that you need to figure out what's working for you and what's not working for you in your domain. The next point is, I would say don't use Mail Tracker directly. As Rajaswa pointed out yesterday, link analytics to your website. Basically, Mail Tracker has a lot of advantages as well as disadvantages, being that it can get into the spam folder and professors might not read it. Also, a lot of professors block Mail Tracker related mails. So there can be such cases. I'd say avoid Mail Tracker. Put like just go add Google Analytics to your website and add a link to your website in the mail. The next point is mail contents. Mail contents are very, very important. So you need to make sure your mail is not too long and it's not too short. So you just don't want to have an extremely short mail, which is like a generic email for the professor. So if someone sends you an email and if it's a generic mail, you'd obviously ignore it. You'd say, okay, fine, you're just sending it to 100 people and it's not for me. And if it's too long, you wouldn't bother reading it. So ideally, I'd say have your mail in such a way that you don't have to scroll through it. It just fits in your mail page that shows up. Highlight important points. So important points can be some project that you worked on, the professor under whom you've done your work or something so far, any internship that you've done so far, the timelines that you're applying for, and all those important details. Try to highlight those. Briefly introduce yourself and your interest in 1-2 lines. Don't spend like a big paragraph on it. Just 1-2 lines is fine. Try to keep it very short and concise. And then talk about why do you want, or why do you think that lab is the right fit for you. So this is one point that I feel gets ignored a lot, and this is something that I learned over time. That when I started off initially, I was talking a lot about myself and my projects and how this will be a good opportunity for me and all that. But then later I realized that it's important to write why that lab is good for you. So you can just write, okay, I have these experiences so far. I went through some of the papers of your lab. I went through some of the recent work in your lab, and I find these points interesting. And then if you have something in your mind, something you're curious about, or some point you didn't understand, or something you need more clarity upon, you can add those. That basically reflects that you have interest in that field, and you're generally genuinely interested in that particular topic or the work of the lab. So that is something that you can do. Also, if you're applying to only 1 or 2 domains, then what you can do is you can conduct a small study by reading some 5 to 10 papers on the topic, and then you can just compile your thoughts into a doc file or a PDF, and then let the professor know that, okay, I've done this literature study, or you can just write a blog on Medium on it. So this is something again that helped me, or I figured out very later in my journey. So initially, after I had sent out some mails, I got a few interview responses, and after in those interviews, I was asked by some professors to, do these minor literature reviews or read a few papers. So I just compiled them all into a doc file, and then I thought it might be a good idea to sort of send these along as well in my future mails. And these sort of increased my response ratio significantly. After I did this, I started to get a lot more replies, because I think the professors then knew that, okay, this guy is credible. He's already interested, and he's taking initiatives from his own end before starting to sort of get some context on the domain, basically. So that's something you can consider if you have the time. Again, it's not necessary. I've known a lot of people getting very good thesis without this as well, but this is again subjective and something that you'll have to figure out. The next point is decide your plans for summer beforehand. So you'll have to figure out if you want to do a corporate internship, if you want to do a research internship, or if you want to do an extended thesis. This will be extremely important in managing your LORs. So as I said, that you'd require typically 3 LORs for your grad school. It can be 2 or 4, but on average, you require 3 LORs. So one of them can definitely come from your undergraduate supervisor, anyone from college. You need to figure out where the rest of the 2 come from. Those 2 can also be from your undergraduate university, that is BITS, or they can be from your thesis, they can be from another internship, they can be from a research internship, anything. So you just need to figure out how you're going to manage those. And also, if you're doing an extended thesis, the good thing about that is that your extended thesis will start somewhere in the summer. And typically, to get good results on an ML related project, you would take around 4-5 months to like have initial results at least. And it can vary obviously, but you'd have some initial results in that time, hopefully. And that is good because your professor can then write more about you. Your professor can write more about the interactions that they've had with you. So that is again an important point that you might want to consider. How do you want to manage your LORs? Is you do not need to have full knowledge about your thesis work while applying. So for my example, I did not have I hadn't done too many projects on medical imaging during the time that I'd applied. So I had done some work on deep learning, but not in the context of medical imaging. However, as I was going through the process, I was intrigued, and I was going through a lot of papers. I was going through some blogs, and I'll get to how those helped me in my interview process later on. But the main thing is that you don't need to have full knowledge. It's just that you need to be curious about what you're applying for, and you need to make sure that you're really focused at that. The next thing is please address the mails correctly and go to the websites of the professors and the labs. So obviously we're all representing BITS as a community, and we do not want to do something wrong and have a wrong impression in front of professors. So please address the mails correctly. Don't address it to the wrong person. Just be sure of what you're typing in the mail. Some professors put tags on their website. So a lot of professors put on their website that, okay, if you want, or if you're asking for a potential collaboration, or for prospective students, you can just add this tag at the beginning of your subject of your mail, and that's how they know that the person has actually gone through the website. So that's again something that they use. So please go to the website. Don't just cold mail. Again, if you want to mail, I'd say have 70% of your template, but keep 30% of your mail to be slightly personalized to the lab or the professor that you're applying to. Don't make it very, very generic, because then there's a high chance that they might ignore you. Once you write something about the professor and the work they've done, then they'll be more or less likely to respond to you. So if you just think about yourself, if someone sends you a message which has some work that you've done, you'd be more tempted to reply to them as compared to when you've just sent a generic email. So that's one thing. The next point is attend talks, attend discussions, reading groups, and just interact with everybody. As Sharad said, just try to find a group of people that have the same interest with you. Attend talks. So there's a lot of forums that conduct reading groups. So there's Weights and Biases. There's so many other places as well, or groups or communities that hold reading groups and discussions. So try to attend those. You can interact with professors there. You can interact with postdocs, PhD students there. You can just learn a lot about what you're doing and your domain from that. So that is extremely important, I feel. And as everyone before has mentioned, networking is important. Try to use LinkedIn, use Twitter. Twitter, I think, is the most is the best place that at least I get a lot of my research updates from. So if you just follow a lot of professors in your field, uh, that's how I sort of get to know, okay, this is something cool that is coming up, or a new work just got published. So that's very important. So try to have a presence there. I'll now get to my application procedure. So my previous experiences before applying, I had done my SOP under Professor Sujit Thomas, which was more on the lines of computer vision. I had done a couple of small-scale internships at that point, and yeah, so that's probably it. And then so around December, there was this call for applications from MGH and Howard Medical School. So I had to submit my CV, my two LORs, and a 500-word statement of purpose. So this is very rare, this application procedure, and it's not generally followed in thesis. But some labs do have this kind of a procedure where they'll have a call for application. So for that, you can get those calls for applications through some reading lists. So I think Sharad or Rajaswa yesterday pointed out to some reading lists. You can go through their links or resources for that. And once you have that, or if you want some help with writing the statement of purpose and all these details, you can get in touch with me or any other senior. So after this initial process, I had my first interview in the beginning of January, and this interview was done by a postdoc at the lab or a PhD student and a PhD student. So what can happen is either you can have a postdoc, a PhD student, or a master student interviewing you, or you can have the PI of the lab directly interviewing you. So both cases are possible. It depends on how the lab is structuring it. So once I had that, they asked me about the work I'd done in my previous experiences, my SOP project, my internship projects, and all those. And one thing that did work for me, or I feel something that was good for me, was that I tried to tailor my responses to incorporate the work that I'd be using or doing in the lab when I joined. So basically, I tried to tailor my responses in such a way that I could show, okay, this is the work I've done so far, and this is something that can also be beneficial in my work during my thesis. So that's something that I know like helped my case a lot, because later on when I joined and I spoke to the postdoc about how the entire application procedure, he told me that, okay, this is something we liked about you, that you knew what you want to do, and you knew how the things you have done so far can uh, sort of shape what you'll do in the future and so on. So that's something that you can consider doing as well. You can also mention a couple of ideas that you'd like to work on in your interview towards the end, when they just ask you, do you have any questions or something. It's not necessary to do that, or it's not necessary that you'd be working on that exact thing later on, but you can just say these are potential areas that sort of interest you, and that basically again gives the interviewer an idea as to, okay, this guy or this person is really interested, and this person has an idea of what he wants to do, or he or she wants to do. So again, this is something that you can consider doing that worked for me. After this, my application was under review for a couple of months, after which I had another interview or discussion with the PI, and then after that I got my thesis confirmed around March. So a bit more on that. So this is not the only place that I had applied to a lot of places, and what I'd suggest is apply to as many places as possible. It is always better to have offers in hand and then reject later. So towards the end of my application procedure, I had around 5 to 6 good thesis options, and then I could spend some time to make a decision as to what I want to do. Also, there are unpredictable circumstances where, in my case, I had COVID, and a lot of labs were then reluctant to have these remote internships. So I again missed out on a lot of opportunities because of that. So it's good to have backups. Try to keep at least 4 offers in hand before stopping or before just calling it a day. So just try to apply to as many places as possible, and you'll get a lot of rejects. Like I had almost 15 times the number of rejects than I had confirmations. So all that will happen. Just don't be demotivated. Prepare well for your interviews. Go through the lab website and the current projects. So every lab would have a project section where they talk about the current work that they're doing. If you can, just try to talk about these in your interview. Talk about what you'd like to work on. Talk about what excites you. If you're lacking knowledge in the area that you're applying to, I'd recommend going through conference tutorials before your interview. So if you're applying to something in which you've not done a lot of work before and something that interests you, but you have that knowledge gap, you can just go through some papers, or you can just go through the conference. A lot of conferences post tutorials on YouTube, so you can go through the recent ones and you get a lot of context from that. The next thing is follow-ups are extremely important. So all my confirmations were after at least 2 to 3 follow-ups. Sometimes they even went to 5, 6, or 7 follow-ups. So schedule them once every 1 to 2 weeks, and then make sure your follow-up content is different each time. If your follow-up content is the same every time, then it's not really beneficial, because it just seems like you're just spamming them, and it's not good. Just be polite and make sure the content is different. Also have a good technical presence online. Try to have a good try to have all your GitHub repositories documented. By documented, I mean you do not have to just document every line of code. Just have a description and readme for all your repos, and keep your resume clean. And most likely, if someone's reading your mail, they will check your GitHub. So try to maintain it well. Coming to my actual thesis, so my thesis was on universal lesion detection. I won't take much of a time on that. I'll just give a 3-4 line summary. So basically, lesion detection has a lot of issues. As a clinician, you would not want to have 10 different models for each anatomy. So you wouldn't want to have one model for your lung. You wouldn't want to have a different model for your kidney. You wouldn't want to have a different model for your pelvis and so on. So as a clinician, you would want to have a single model that can detect lesions in any kind of anatomy, and that's what universal lesion detection is all about. So obviously there are a lot of challenges, and these are the challenges that sort of intrigued me and I wanted to explore these further. So basically, the first one is efficient 3D contextual modeling. What this means is basically our human anatomies are not 2D structures, they are 3D structures. So they have this 3D context, and it is important to sort of incorporate this 3D context well. The second is smaller region of interest. So lesions are typically very small in your scan. So if I just had to show you a picture, you can see this red box here. That's how small a lesion is compared to the entire scan. So that is again a challenge. Again, there's variations across different anatomies. So as I mentioned, that a lung CT scan looks different from a liver CT scan and so on. And each anatomy has its own typical windows, and there's differences in slice intervals and so on. So I won't get in the details, but if you want to get to know these further, you can just contact me after this talk, and I'll be happy to share details. So we did our work around universal lesion detection. Finally, we got very good results. We had a approximately 1.5% to 2% gain in sensitivity points, and we submitted it to a conference which didn't get through, but we had positive responses. So we'll work on them and submit it to a journal. The next thing is so this was basically the conclusion from my thesis, that each anatomy needs to be processed and penalized differently. Okay, I won't spend too much time on the technical details. I'll just get to the lab experience since we're running out of time. Coming to the lab experience, my lab experience was really good. I'd say apart from your thesis, what is also important during your time in the thesis is to network and to build connections. So I was in touch with a lot of people from my lab while I was working on. So I'd say when you're working on a thesis, work on your thesis and also work on 2-3 other side projects of the lab. So I was working on my thesis, and I was also working on some other projects that my peers were sort of leading and working on. So what that helps you is basically you can get a lot more context on different kinds of things. You can explore a lot of different works in the same domain. And I think at this age it's good for us to like explore as much as possible, because once you have a lot of knowledge about different fields, then you can decide what you want to do. So that's important. Also, keep your professor updated about everything. So if you're facing any difficulties, if you have any personal issues, if you're down because of some personal issue for a week, if you have any technical roadblocks, any minor major roadblocks, it is fine, just discuss it with them. They're humans, they understand that you're facing problems, it's fine. Also, these interactions are very, very important in your LORs. So try to have regular interactions with your PI. Try to discuss everything with them. So they basically, when they're writing their LORs, they need to know what is your thinking. How do you think when you face a problem? How do you approach a problem and everything? So you need to have those interactions. You need to give them that opportunity to write good stuff about you in your LORs. So please don't shy away from that. Just try to have as many interactions as possible with them. uh, yeah, and that's pretty much it. So like, build connections, be honest, and like just try to make the full use of your thesis opportunity. um, that's pretty much it from my end. If you have any questions, then like you can just ask me after the talk or in the Q&A section. I'll be happy to help. Also, if you want to like find out more about my thesis work, you can go through my website, or you can just contact me later. Thank you so much.
Okay, so if anyone has any doubts, they can ask any of the three speakers. Like you can just either put your queries in the chat box or unmute and speak up.
Hello.
Yeah, you're audible. You're audible.
Yeah, my question is for Sharad Bhaiya. I want to ask him, like, being from electronics background, and he's having interest in machine learning and deep learning. So how did you decide on what electives you had to utilize for your degree? Because if you're applying for masters, you got to see if you need to do those typical prerequisites, or are you going to devote more time towards your profile by doing either SOP or like some other project type course?
Yeah, so for MS, courses are really important. Um, you guys have, I guess now there's a lot of options, or at least people in electronics get these CS courses. Um, so I've spent semesters trying to get courses, but I wasn't able to get them. Even I think if you'll ask people, you'll get to hear how Nina has shouted in the ARC room on me every single last start of the semester. So the courses have been very unfortunate for me. So, but I think if you get a chance, then definitely do the courses, because if they show up on the transcript, people don't look at your MS application for more than 3 or 4 minutes. So if you have a course, then it's very very good.
In the online setting, do you really recommend doing these prereqs like DSA, OOPS, etc.? Because in the online setting, it's really hard to score compared to the offline mode.
You're asking for with respect to courses, right?
Yeah, I'm asking, like, you have your degree requirements, and if you have to finish your degree requirements, like, would you recommend someone to finish those CS core courses in the online mode, or to wait for for the later semesters?
See, online it's a little bit tricky because it pretty much matters what your social circle is. If you think, if you'll be able to score given your social circle is good enough, basically, you have WhatsApp groups or not, then, then choose the course. Otherwise, I was actually suggesting, so DSA, OOP, these things, you know, OOP is, DSA is a little more important probably, but I was actually suggesting more advanced courses. For example, ML, or next time there's going to be a course on computational learning theory. There was a course this time on meta learning. There might be a course next time on Bayesian non-parametrics as well. I was suggesting these courses. BSA would, at some level, if you have a good CGPA, people just assume that you know these things. So only like a few colleges are very stringent on having these. But if you do have them, if you do get a chance, and if you think that you'll be able to score well, then I think it's a no-brainer.
Right. I also wanted to ask, what's your view on extended thesis? Since the time period for that would be longer. In that case, how are you supposed to approach your co-supervisor? And the extended thesis is spontaneous thing. Like when you're working during the summer after third year, do you realize that, oh, I might as well extend my thesis, or it's decided before you start?
Yeah, it's mostly always decided before you start, because for thesis you need to decide. I think for first semester it's March, for second semester it's around October, which is the last date. So it's mostly always pre-decided.
Sharad, sorry to interrupt. One important point, please mention your dates that you're considering in your thesis mails. So whenever you're approaching someone, mention the dates that you're looking for. That's very important.
Yeah, so coming back to your question, my thoughts on extended thesis is definitely that, if you get a chance, then do it, because uh, I'm assuming, you're doing it under a good professor. So the better the LOR, the more your chances in general of a better publication, of a better graduate school admission. So you need to. It's not a binary decision, always. It's you need to think about how you're going to arrange your letter of recommendations, how things are going to pan out eventually. Because I think, like, for a lot of people this year, things didn't pan out as they thought they would because of COVID. Initially, I guess everyone had assumed that, yeah, they'd be able to go this year at least, but that didn't pan out. So it's not a very binary decision, but I think, like, the end goal is generally that your LOR should be really good. Um, you should, unless unless you have a really good CGP and stuff, you need papers, research papers. Otherwise, frankly, impossible to get into graduate schools nowadays.
I'd say even with the good CGPA, papers do really help, like especially for the top 10 attempts.
Yeah, so cool. Hope that resolves that. Any other questions?
Hello.
Yeah.
I just wanted, it's a general question actually. So if someone wants to apply for a thesis in the second semester, that is photo, that is like starting from January. So what in your opinion, like it is for all of you, so what in your opinion should be the ideal time to start sending the emails?
Right now,
Okay.
like, my opinion is start as soon as possible. What's the worst that could happen? They'll say that, oh, I'll hire after 2 months. You can get back to them after 2 months.
Yeah, actually there was, I came across two schools of thought. Some were saying that maybe they'll be occupied with research interns, so they might not consider and all that
Yeah,
stuff. So I
so
just
it
wanted to
depends.
cross
Yeah,
check.
yeah, yeah. So it depends on the place, definitely. So Microsoft Research is one place which hires its interns very late. So Microsoft Research, you need to approach them like three or only like 3 months back or something. But if you plan to do an overseas internship where there's visa and all that required, then the sooner the better actually. Microsoft Research, I'm assuming if you're doing it in India, it's only like 2 or 3 months procedure at max.
I'd say be started with the process at least 6 months prior to your joining date, or
Yeah.
when you intend to join.
Yeah. So see, 2 or 3 months easily go in visa processing, which I don't know what is happening with visa right now, but usually 2 or 3 months go in visa processing, 1 month goes in administrative processing at the university, um, and usually 1 month goes in just the interview process, like you emailing, sending the mentor, they taking an interview, they taking a second interview, etc.
Okay.
So yeah,
Thank you.
One thing to keep in mind is considering visa situations, like some places might be unilaterally better for thesis if you want to go in person. Like a remote thesis generally isn't going to, I mean, going in person is going to be a lot more valuable than a remote thesis, in my opinion. So that's something to consider. Like if you're applying to the US and other places, it might not be so easy to get in as of now.
I also wanted to know, like, are you guys thinking of taking 2 years after the graduation as work ex and then applying for maybe MS plus PhD, considering the immigration policies and all?
Sharad, do you want to take that?
um, I'm not sure. That's my answer. It's not a. It's too soon, to be honest. This cycle was pretty brutal in general. So, um, but yeah, definitely considering that option. Most likely that will happen, but there's no guarantee, especially after this year.
I mean, your question is it's a bit subjective, so it depends really on person to person on how you want to define your own career goal. So if your out goal is eventually a PhD, then definitely you can consider a MS plus PhD program, and it's not necessary that you need 1 year research experience or 2 years research experience before applying. You can apply right from undergrad if you have a decent enough profile. I don't see any reason why you won't get it. A lot of people do get their PhD right after their undergrad. So it's not impossible, but you need to work for it. So it's just you need to decide what you want to do and how you want to shape your career and decide accordingly.
Yeah, so if you really want to get in a good PhD program, then I would say join a pre-doctoral research program, uh, either at Google, Microsoft. I think TCS has it this year. Um, so the point of these programs is basically to be able to train you to do research and prepare you for a doctoral program. So, and people from these programs usually end up getting like the best offers. So you'll find that in MSR there's a particular group from where every single year people go into Carnegie Mellon machine learning department PhD, which is supposed to be the top one right now. But the the question about PhD is not that straightforward because it's very subjective. It depends on areas. Um, so you'll see that neuroscience, psychology, uh, these are coming up a lot with respect to its connections with AI. And if you have a lot of relevant work experience and relevant, you know, uh, good LORs and stuff, then you can even directly get in after a uh, just direct undergrad. So one of I don't know if you know about Ajay. Ajay is he's an SAIDL member. He got in NYU psychology, uh, which is a really good PhD program. It's on perception, which is pretty much like deep learning nowadays. So yeah, it's not a very straightforward question to answer. Um,
I'm sorry, this is more of a specific question, but because of the timelines, I'm actually considering doing my PS2 in my 4.2. So, would it be possible to take sort of an extended thesis and continue that and apply for masters in the following year? And if so, apart from an extended thesis, what are the options people normally take uh, in case they want to follow such a route?
So you can go for a research assistant position after your undergrad, which would be typically a 9 months or a 1 year position. And there again, you'll be conducting, like you'll be doing research for about 9 months to a year, and you'll get your LORs from the lab that you're working at. So that's an option that a lot of people do consider.
So even these research fellow positions, they are contract basis positions, so they can be 1 or 2 years. So basically, you can do the uh, or you can even spend 1 year as a research intern if you don't get a research fellow position
Yes, yes.
at Microsoft Research or Google Research or TCS Research or yeah, what else? Amazon Research, Intel Research, these places. These are really good places for industry.
Yeah,
Uh,
I just wanted to make sure that it won't impact my application negatively if I have that sort of a gap between my undergrad and my master's application, right?
So a lot of that you can cover it in your SOP. So in your statement of purpose, you need to justify it, or you need to sugarcoat it in such a way that it doesn't sound odd. So you can just say, while I was doing my PS2, I got interested in this and I wanted to take up or do research in this field, and then that's how you progress. So I
Wait,
think
so are you asking pursuing a research internship parallelly with PS2, or are you asking doing it after PS2?
Not parallelly with PS2. So say I did a thesis for my PS2, could I extend it over the following year so that I can cover the remainder of the year?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure how I would explain that in my SOP and everything while applying for masters.
See, first get a thesis, all these things will be sorted out. Longer research experiences are always better.
also, if anyone is doing an early grad, you get 1 year for your thesis. I mean, you have an extra semester free. So professors generally like it when you are applying for a longer position, because for them also it's uh, basically you need some time to have any productive output in your research. So the professors don't generally like it when you have like 3 or 4 months of time. If you have a longer duration that you can work on, then professors will be more likely to sort of give you an internship. So you can consider that too.
Yeah, so just to answer the original question, there is no negative impact if you pursue a long-term research position.
There's a question in the chat window. So, how important are research papers for getting MS PhD school admits? Extremely important. Like, even if you have a high CG or a low CGPA, papers are very, very important, especially in ML, because the field is in general so competitive that you have a lot of people with crazy profiles applying to grad schools, and uh, it's always good to have good conference or journal publication under your belt, and preferably a first or second author publication.
So PhD, it's impossible to get in without a publication.
Yeah, yeah.
And MS, if you have a publication, it helps.
But try to keep your CG as high as possible. Like
Yeah,
even if it's late now, just try to improve it as much as possible. For the next few semesters, just put in a lot of effort for your CG, because CG is something that's like it is sort of a objective factor in terms of evaluating your application. So it might be the case that if your CG is low, your entire application. I mean, people don't generally say that it happens, but it can be the case that it will get overlooked. So
getting a conference paper or journal paper is not at all easy.
yeah, yeah.
So like if you're shooting for a conference paper or a journal paper at the end of your thesis, what you might really have is just a preprint, and nobody really cares about preprint. So what you really need is something substantial, and for them, conference or journal paper is definitely substantial, but there's a lot of reasons why it won't get you won't have a published thing.
Right.
Number one being the conference timeline is not there. Second might be that uh, in general, I don't think it's that easy to publish a first author paper in the first go. So keep your CGPA definitely as high as possible. Um, and if you have a good CGPA, if you have good accepted papers, then the world is your oyster.
I had a question regarding this. So since really establishing yourself in the field is more important, no matter what you're doing. So in that case, shouldn't we just look into somehow getting into these societies and top journals like for like CVPR or ICCV or like something like that if one's talking about vision.
Yeah, but that's the point, right? It's if you think it's easy to get a publication in these, then you're most probably wrong.
Yeah,
I, I,
No,
it's
I mean
very
to say,
difficult.
like, if at the end, like even after we are finishing the masters, we need to have a solid profile. And so, if before applying for a master, if one takes like significant time, let's say a year or two, and one is able to churn out papers, because like some seniors like they don't really apply to masters after the BTech is over. They work in labs, and then somehow in that grind they are able to churn paper out of it. So do you guys recommend like taking that risk factor and sacrificing stuff for that reputed journal?
sacrificing what? Your CGPA?
No,
No, it's
sacrificing
uh,
like
taking
your
one or
work
two years
extent.
of like, yeah, taking 1 or 2 years to do research after undergrad and then applying.
What is the sacrifice in that? I don't.
No, I mean to say, like one person could be doing work X and industrial work, and the other one is just shooting a shot in the dark by going
See,
for a
so
paper
so
opportunity.
so if you're not able to publish after, let's say, 1.5 years, then it's a overall negative signal in general. Um, so it's a bit of a negative statement, I know, but ML as a research field is extremely competitive. Um, in fact, if someone had asked me from first year if they want to get into research, the number one field that would suggest them to not get into is ML, just because of the amount of competition. So yeah, churning out papers and all this is pretty important, but it isn't that easy. And um, so one aspect is that you're able to churn out preprints, but you're not able to churn out papers. That's a separate
Yeah,
story.
that's the thing. So even for your like papers, it's very unlikely that you will get your acceptance in your first go. So it's, I mean, it depends, but as undergrads, we do not have much experience or much research
Knowledge.
experience. Yeah, and it takes time for us to sort of get used to those habits and get used to the entire process of how to think from a research perspective. So that takes up a lot of time initially, and it's very difficult to get an acceptance in the first go. So for me, I like, as I said, my thesis publication got rejected very recently from a conference, but the reviews are optimistic. So I know I have to sort of rerun or conduct some more experiments, have some more insights or details about some things, and then I need to again reapply or resubmit to another place, and that would again take 6 months more of you know time, and journal reviews are again very long. So all these things are very subjective. That's something that you'll have to just think what you want to do.
Yeah, but just to kind of put it in short, it will never happen that if you spend 1.5 years or something, then you're not having anything. That's like a very rare
Yeah,
situation. I
if you're
I
if you're
don't.
at a good lab, then more often than not, after 1.5 year, you would have something to show for it.
Yeah,
In
especially
terms of, yeah, go on, sorry.
since you're yeah, I don't know. In general, victims are pretty smart, so I wouldn't expect anyone to be stuck at like a lab or something and not have any publications.
In terms of the trade-off you mentioned, I guess, let's say, I don't know, 1 year of industry experience where people, your peers, are doing jobs versus Arya, I really don't think it matters in the long run. Like most careers are say 30 odd years, and the fact that you spend say 1 year doing research, especially if you go on to do a PhD, will not change anything in the long term. Like in the short term, yes, you'll see, I don't know, I mean, your peers say being SDs or leveling up, but I don't think it matters in the long run, especially if you get a better PhD admit through the RS.
Yeah, I mean, if you're applying, like if you're planning 100% for a PhD, then it might make sense. Like it might make a lot of sense. But it's again just my opinion. So you need to talk to a lot of people.
Also, are you guys like interested for like the course type thesis, course type MS? Are you guys planning your profile for the thesis type MS?
So
Yeah,
for me,
so
I am planning it in thesis-based MS. That again, like depends from person to person. I think on how you
yeah,
want to
like
shape your career goals.
we're giving talks, which is, and the name of the session is titled Thesis Talks. So I'd expect everyone who's applying to do a thesis.
I mean, I think, yeah, as long as you want to do research, I think you'll be structuring your profile more for a thesis based master. So, yeah, I can't speak for everybody here, but I do think most of the speakers here are focusing for research based masters.
Like it's you can choose it later. Obviously, a lot of programs have that flexibility that you can choose your specialization, or if you want to do a thesis-based versus the course-based 1 year or after a semester of your masters. But that's again a subjective choice that you'll have to make based on what your goals are.
Okay, so
Also, there was this one general perception that has come up. Like many people say, like it's better to work in some other body other than the other than working under a BITS prof. Like they say, it's better to work at IBM Labs or MSR or some other uni, but not under BITS prof.
it depends on the prof and it depends on the place. These are not binary questions. You need to see, first of all, bits. I don't know. Do you know Ashwin Srinivasan?
Professor Ashwin Srinivasan, do you like
You
working
might know
under
about
Professor
him.
Ashwin Srinivasan or like the app care lab that we have uh,
No,
is
no, I don't know about him.
So which year are you in?
I'm in second year. I'm going to go in 3 months.
Yeah. So Ashwin Srinivasan is a chair professor at BITS. He's the head of the App Care Research Center that we have, AI Research Center. He is in his area of AI. He's one of the best people in the world. Okay. So there's no single answer to your question. There are researchers at MSR. There are researchers at Google. These are like in general really good places. If you get an internship, I don't think there should be any reason to reject these. And projects at these places would obviously be very relevant. But it's not true that you cannot do good work under a bits prof. You just need to in ML, pretty much what matters is you need to get results in some sense. And if you can do that, um, I don't think should be a problem anyway.
I think one thing is in the context of bits, like there are a few specific profs who it would be really worth if you can do something, and you need to find them out. I mean, one reason the perception sort of exists is, I guess a lot of people take up thesis not to do research, but say as one way to stay on campus to finish up placements or say finish up extra courses and stuff. So that is a phenomenon that happens, and those reasons for a thesis are very different. So I mean, that's one of the reasons I feel this perception of, I mean, doing on-campus thesis versus off-campus thesis exists. But yeah, as Sharad said, I mean, if you find the right prof, it can be worth more than other internships. Such.
See, so that's why I was suggesting it's important to talk to or like join a group of people, who have like some sort of similar goals or something, because there'll be a lot of these questions. This is like an endless list. If you have a bunch of seniors that you can talk to, well and great. Otherwise, just develop your own group. My suggestion is to join SAIDL, but that's just a self promotion from my
yeah,
side.
yeah, like definitely go through the website once. You'll find a lot of people working on different domains. So uh, it's good to have that uh, growing as a team thing. So helps a lot and helped a lot of us as well. Like me, Sharad, we know each other from SAIDL from the past 3 years. So it's always good.
Yeah. So if there's any last question or something, uh, then I can take it. Otherwise, I'm leaving at 8:50.
I just have one question. So,
Yes.
if we are doing masters just after our like undergrad, we'll have to start like we have to fill the applications by the end of 4-1, right?
Yeah.
So, how can we show our work of a 1 year thesis, like if you are doing a 1 year thesis while applying?
You cannot. You can only show what you've done in the 6 months, and you can only talk about what you've done in the 6 months.
Like
So
try to have a preprint. It's difficult to have a publication by then. Try to have a preprint to at least show that you've done something. But again, they're not going to guarantee you anything. Try to have something to like. You need to mention those things somehow in your SOP, and hopefully your LORs would reflect the work that you've done so far.
Okay, so the 1 year thesis are more useful if you are like doing masters after like a break after your undergrad.
Yeah.
yeah,
Cool. Any last question?
If you have any other questions and like want to approach us individually for any questions or just specific to research or our interest, then you can just contact us.
yeah. I think most of us have put our websites in the slides, so I mean, getting in touch from there should be easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think the slides are available. Maybe you can just post.
I'll just post my slides in the chat. Just a second.
I'm posting a link to my website. Just contact me if you want this. I don't think my slides are better than what was shared yesterday, so just refer those.
Yeah, actually, even I'll just put up my website. If you want, like the website. I think the CT coordinators or the event organizers can just compile the list of our contact details together so that it's easier for people to contact later on.
Yeah, we can send them along with the calendar. I mean, in the calendar invites.
Works. That would be great.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so
Alright.
much for listening to us, guys.
Thank
Just
you,
be
Bhaiya.
open to contacting us whenever you want.
Okay. Thank you, Sharad Bhaiya, Ashwin Bhaiya, and Adithya Bhaiya for helping us. And this day of thesis talks is now concluded. Thank you.
Thanks for organizing this. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. See you.